Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much. It was so nice of you to join me. And I was just introducing you and telling everybody how you're the, knitting icon and definitely somebody I hold in high regards. And I've been a fan of yours for like the longest time. Not only of your speed, which we'll talk in a bit, but of the skill level of your dedication to bringing Shetland to the world map, of teaching your skills, of sharing your knowledge with, other knitters. And I wanted to start with like a little bit going far, far back. I've heard your interview one time and you mentioned that you basically don't even remember when you started to knit, like you always were surrounded by knitters. And you also mentioned that your mom didn't love knitting, though she was very capable. And it really reminded me my story because my grandma was very impressive seamstress and crafter. She could knit, she could crochet, she could make men's suit on her Zinger sewing machine. And my mom's earliest memory was how my grandmother was working so much on the sewing machine that her shoulder started hurting. And the kids were basically turning the handle of the sewing machine to help her sew because that was the income for the family and they needed it to feed the family. And so when my mom was growing up, she really sort of resented the idea that she must learn how to knit or crochet or sew. So even though she was really good at it, for her it was always sort of representation of the poverty, the need, the must do that. It was never looked at as hobby, as something joyful. Do you feel like that was the reasoning behind your mom's dislike as well? And how did it influence you, like when you started knitting?
Well, I just always loved to knit, and I like the creativity and,
Right.
and just being able to create something unique. And my sort of well, I can remember when I was about maybe 6 or 7 seeing a cardigan pattern in a magazine, and I pleaded and begged my mother to get the yarn to knit this, and it was not Shetland yarn, so she had to make an effort and spend money on it, and money was never plentiful. So I guess she was worried that she bought this yarn and nothing happened. But I remember it was a pale yellow and it had some kind of a knit and purl pattern, but of course there's no evidence of it now.
Right.
And then as I got older, I started on to Fair Isle. And in the 1960s, we were knitting a lot of Fair Isle yokes. I would probably be doing one every week, just for the necessary income. There wasn't a lot of work in Shetland in the 1960s. It was a very poor place, and there was no opportunity for women to go out to work. So our way of helping was to do some knitting at home. Now, when we first started knitting the Fair Isle yokes, we could choose the colours and the patterns. And so there was endless opportunity to create, which I loved. And then as I guess fashion got involved, then the buyers started to dictate exactly which patterns, which colours and when to use them, and then it just got boring. So
have you ever like resented the fact that you had to knit, or was it always like, even if it wasn't the most exciting pattern, it still brought you pleasure?
No, I never felt I had to knit. I just wanted to.
Right.
So something I wanted to do. Yeah.
And did you feel like you're the older generation of knitters in your family? You mentioned you had an aunt who was knitting, also your mom. Were they like, did you always feel like they were impressed by you, proud of you, like supportive of you? How did you learn the patterns? Was it all written patterns, so it was just sort of like they sketched it for you? Like,
I think a lot of it was just watching. because you can learn a lot by watching rather than doing to begin with. If you watch efficient knitters, you get to know what it should look like. And yeah, they didn't not support me, but it wasn't effusive support.
Right.
Not very demonstrative.
Did you ever kept like a diary of your design ideas? No.
No. And back then there wasn't any money, you know. Photography was a different thing then. You had to buy the film, you had to take the photos, and then you had to pay for them to be developed, whether they were any good or not. So taking photos and knitting, no, didn't happen.
Right. And then in Shetland, basically, you were taught knitting in school, right, as part of home economics class?
It was in primary school.
And was it also Fair Isle, or was it like part lace, part Fair Isle? Like what kind of skills did they teach?
I don't remember much Fair Isle at school. And I think that's probably because I didn't get knitting instruction in secondary school. Once I passed 12, there was no knitting instruction for me. It was just the school I went to. Whereas my sister, who stayed at the local school for her secondary education, did get a lot more knitting. So once I was 12, I was out on my own and learned however I could.
How was it like in general growing up in Shetland? Like, is it like the type of place where everybody knows everybody, where you like intimidated by the knitter next door and you never feel good enough? Or like on the contrary, because everybody gets together all the time and knits together, you like feel inspired all the time? How was it for you?
Well, when I was little, there wasn't, the next door neighbours were always knitting too. So on one side there was Betty, who was always knitting Fair Isle, and it was usually jumpers and cardigans. And then on the other side, it was Annie, and she would be knitting cockleshell scarves. That was her thing. Right. So plus what my aunt that lived with us, she used to knit a lot of haps, you know, very plain. I was looking at some that she'd knitted, and they hadn't that well finished. But as somebody said, these people were desperate to get the income, and if they could get it sold, poorly finished or not, then off it went.
Right.
So it wouldn't probably pass muster nowadays.
And then at some point you left Shetland, right? And you lived in England and London for a while?
Yeah, I did. I was 3 years in London and I kept knitting. And at that point there was enough income from knitting that I used to have wool posted down from Shetland, and I would knit. I can't remember what I knitted, but I would knit and send it back up to Shetland again. And I got 1 or 2 commissions when I was in London too. I remember one that was really hideous, but the man loved it, so that was fine.
Well, that's all that counts, if the customer is happy.
Yeah.
How did it feel for you to come back to Shetland after London? Like when you were exposed to this big city life and then you're coming back to the island?
Well, I had 3 years in London, and then I had 8 years in Yorkshire in a smaller town.
Right.
And coming back to Shetland was something that I never thought would happen. I can remember going away on the boat from Lerwick to Aberdeen, and that would have been when I was at college, and thinking I'll probably never live in Shetland again, because at that point it was before oil was discovered, and we were still short of jobs, so I didn't expect ever to live back here. So it was very nice to come back home. But all the time I lived in England, people would say, "Oh, where are you going for your holidays?" And I would always say, "I'm going home," and they would wonder what I was speaking about. But yes.
How did Shetland change? Like in your eyes, after the wool festival started, like they started about 10 years ago, right? Like,
Yeah,
how do you feel, like, because I feel like Shetland has been rediscovered a lot through the Wool Week, because a lot of people now coming to Shetland, a lot of people heard of Shetland, a lot of people started, you know, knitting lace and knitting Fair Isle. Like, do you feel that it's been like a positive change? How do you see it as a Shetlander?
it's undoubtedly been a positive change, because I've always knitted, but I kind of knitted in isolation. I didn't really know that many other people that did knit. And it's been lovely to see younger people getting more interested in knitting. And I don't know if that would have happened without Shetland Wool Week and visitors coming and tutors coming. And I think it's made a huge difference. There's certainly more young people interested in knitting and appreciating the heritage too, which is lovely.
And then, like, I've heard one of the interviews where you mentioned how your first teaching gig was basically an accident, like they couldn't find anybody else and somebody asked you and you said, sure, let me go and teach. How did you change, like, as a teacher, right, as an instructor, because since then you've done so many classes? How do you see yourself change, like from the woman who went to that first class to the instructor that you are today?
I write the feedback forums. So important to get the feedback. And I think when I first did classes, I was overestimating the abilities of the knitters, and I thought that they could do more than they really could. So sometimes I remember one class where I had them starting a scarf, and they were taking forever to get to start the Fair Isle. So I never did that again. But somebody gave me the feedback that made me rethink. So no, I hadn't a clue what I was doing when I first did classes.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite project that you teach in classes?
A favorite project?
Like something that like anybody can do and like take home maybe?
Well, yeah, a long time ago, I was told that people like to go home with something finished, not a pile of yarn and needles.
Right.
So I do a Fair Isle bookmark, which is a very small project, and it's knitted in the round, and it has to be cut open so that it lies flat, and then you have to finish the edges. So there's a lot of things to learn in a very small project.
Right.
And the good knitters can do that in 3 hours. Especially the Scandinavians are very, very good at
right.
understanding.
Do you have anything against the flat Fair Isle, or is that something like, does it, if you see a project, right, for yourself, let's say, and there is flat Fair Isle, would you not pick that project? Would you go for round, knitting in the round Fair Isle, or does it, like, it doesn't matter?
I always knit Fair Isle in the round, yeah. Yeah.
So if there's a way to escape it, you'll escape it.
Yeah, I like to always see the right side when I'm knitting.
Right.
It's a lot easier.
I was actually, a friend of mine asked today a question. He's a male knitter and he likes to knit Fair Isle, and he was also like a huge fan of yours, and he was asking, how is there like a way to change the pattern that was written for a woman to adapt it for a man's body? Like, is there any tricks that you have that help?
You mean for something like a jumper?
Right.
Well, I do the same shape for man and woman. I don't change. Occasionally I have knit Fair Isle with a shaped waist, but it's not worth the hassle, to be honest. If you knit it so that it's slightly, so that it's not too baggy, then the wool will stretch in the places it needs to stretch. So So almost everything is just a straight up and down, straight sides. It's easier.
Okay. And you've mentioned somewhere also, I think it was like Fruity Knitting interview that you've done, that you have a system of how you pick the colors for blending, and that you go from like the darkest of the dark and the darkest of the lights, and you like try to blend them that way. Do people like always ask you to how to pick? Is that like the most common question? How do you pick colors? How do you blend? Like, or do you think like some people just have an eye for it and some don't, or like is it something we can learn?
It's a really hard thing to try to teach, and I always try to pick colours that will gradually shade. I have this is my newest finished yoke.
It's beautiful.
I don't know if you can see it. Yep. So there's actually 2 shades of gold in the edge, because I felt there wasn't enough contrast between this natural white and the first gold.
Right.
And then here, and I think you shouldn't really see the colour changes, but I have an off-white, an undyed white here, and then halfway through this part, and I went to sand, I think it was. So the sand starts here and goes up, and then there's a lemon and a gold. So I like to graduate, whereas the pattern colours are similar value, if you see what I mean. And can you see the glaring mistake in this pattern? I didn't see it finished.
Not unless you like point it with the needle. It just looks so lovely. I wouldn't notice anything.
Great big triangles to match this, because we always like symmetry. Right. But I was demonstrating at the Textile Museum on Saturday when I was at this bit, and I probably was talking and not paying enough attention. But I did it consistently wrong. So
right.
But anyway.
Do mistakes really bother you? Like when you make mistake, are you very critical of your work? Do you feel like you must be perfect because everybody knows your name? Or do you like look at it as just like it happens to all of us kind of thing?
Sometimes my favorite saying is, well, the knitter on a galloping horse notice it, and if they won't, then I let it go. But no, I usually like to fix things. Yeah, one way or another.
Right. When you see other people knitting something, right? Let's say your student or somebody, or even like somebody comes during the wool week and you see somebody wearing a sweater. Do you look at it with a critical eye, or do you look at it just admiringly? Like, do you see those mistakes? Do they jump at you right away? Do you see the bad tension?
Well, the ones that kind of annoy me are some of the badly fitting yokes that look stretched from shoulder point to shoulder point and have a low back neck, because I need my back neck warm. So I don't, and I think a lot of that is down to the use of short rows.
Right. So it's like when you do the top down, basically, the top down creates that neckline.
I don't do top down, and I don't do short rows normally. I have one pattern with short rows in a yoke, but that's the only one. And I remember one other time I was with Wilma Malcolmson, and we were looking at a poor gentleman sitting with a high neck jumper up, and it sort of came down like this, and then it had a big bump in it before it went down to the body. And we both sort of looked at it and then looked at each other and said, I would really like to get that jumper and fix it for him, but we didn't think we could.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was talking, so I started knitting Shetland lace about 3 years ago. And I mean, I like to think that I came the long way, because like when I'm looking, this was my very first one. That was the Elizabeth Johnson Heart Stall. You can see the heart like this. But that was like the very first one I made, and it's like super thick cashmere, and I came to like all the cobweb and gossamer yarn now. But I was telling a friend of mine that like my dream to come to Shetland and get criticized by Shetland lace knitters. And she couldn't believe it, because she was like, well, why would you want to be criticized? And I said, because I want to know like every little detail that I'm doing wrong to learn from it, because I'm looking overall and it's pretty, but I'm sure just because I never been properly taught, and it's sort of like I'm just like learning as I go, that I'm doing a lot of mistakes.
What I've seen you doing, you first sort of crossed my radar when I saw the lace that you were doing and thought, that looks great. So I think if you came here expecting people to spontaneously criticize your knitting, you've no chance. but if you begged somebody for advice, you might get it.
Right, right. Oh, that's sweet though.
Yeah.
Do you, like, I know you need some lace, but how do people like, I was talking about it with Alison Randall, and I said, well, like the majority of Shetland knitters need Fair Isle or lace, and she said, well, it sort of depends, like some people are into lace, some people in Fair Isle, and I can't tell you like exact proportion. But when people come to Shetland for the Wool Week, do you feel it's like mostly about Fair Isle, or do you feel like more people are interested in Shetland lace?
I think it's just everything. So a lot of people are interested in the wool and spinning and weaving. So there's quite a lot of interest in the spinning classes, as well as the lace and it's just everything really.
Right.
Anything, yeah.
And then another question, a little bit controversial, basically. So that discussion started in Fine Shetland Lace group that Monique Boonstra organized on Facebook. And it was basically like somebody saying that unless you knit from Shetland wool in Shetland, you cannot call it Shetland lace. You can call it like a la Shetland lace, a style of Shetland lace, but you cannot claim it as Shetland lace. And so we were like sort of joking how, well, what if you take a Shetlander out of Shetland to London, let's say, and you provide them with Shetland wool, do they still need Shetland lace, or is it like out of sight, out of mind? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think life's just too short to to give it any, to waste time thinking about it, really. It's I think that we have to celebrate the fact that people want to knit lace. I was speaking to Kathleen Anderson, who's one of the best Shetland lace knitters around, and I said, well, I've never really knitted a lot of lace because it lies in a drawer out of sight. And she said, yeah, that was true. But I think that people need to keep knitting the lace. Yeah.
Well, I'm one of those people who like insist on taking my lace outside and showing it to the world. So even if it's not perfect, people seeing it all over. Like I took it when I went to England, I took it when I went to Italy. Like every time I travel, I bring my lace and I insist on wearing it outside, just because I want more people to learn about it and more people to give it a try. Yeah. And I sort of like, when I started with the lace, it was very accidental. I just, somebody like Monique Boonstra again told me about Shetland lace, and I was like, oh, let me go to the library and I'm just gonna look what they have about it. And I found The Magic of Shetland Lace by Elizabeth Lovick, and I was like, oh, this looks cute, let me try it. And so it wasn't like, I didn't understand that it was supposed to be super difficult. I just thought it was pretty, So I'm thinking like, if I thought that way, maybe more people can try it as well, and keep the traditions going.
Yeah, we need to keep knitting, yes. But I think probably every house, well, maybe not every house, but many houses in Shetland have lace that's stored away in drawers. And I had a look to see what lace I had, because I know that you're a lace knitter. And I'm glad to say no moths popped out. So
Oh, that's so great. Do you have any tricks in like keeping all your knitting? Do you have any advice on how to properly store it?
well, I store it in plastic boxes and hope for the best. And I have some, I do have some acid-free tissue paper, but I don't tend not to use it.
Right.
So no, I just put it in a box and hope.
Could you tell us a little bit about the knitting belt? I know that like most Shetlanders use it. Is like all Shetlanders use it, or is it like certain people use it? Like, why do you prefer using it? Like, what control does it give you? Like, what's the reason behind it?
Well, I like to keep my right needle steady, and I don't like circular needles very much. So I knit virtually everything on double pointed needles. And circular needles are fine for keeping stitches on hold sometimes. And sometimes I have a really thin one that I use for picking up stitches along edges. But I'll show you the belt. I've been sitting knitting before I started on my coffee. So this is my belt.
Mm-hmm.
And I just put it in there. If I move back a bit. I was hoping to do this outside, but the clouds came in. And then the sun came out. So I keep this keeps the needle steady. I've got string, round here that I keep, so that takes all the weight off this hand, and then I just have to knit. So there's not a lot of movement when I'm knitting.
Right.
It's and as soon as possible I get the hand into the circle so that the third needle is ignored while I'm knitting. And I just find this is the nicest way to knit. So this is not really controlling the needle, it's just leaning on it.
It's sort of leaning, yeah. And do you usually stand when you knit, or do you knit it like sitting down also?
I usually sit, but sometimes if I'm trying to burn some calories, I might stand for a bit. But usually I sit, yeah.
Do you ever walk around outside with the knitting belt? Like,
no.
I know this is how it was originally intended.
No.
Like,
if I go walking, I go to burn calories. And yesterday when I went walking, I somehow managed to trip and fall on my head. So it's a good job I didn't have knitting.
That's true. And then like when you knit, like is majority of the things that you need is commissioned, or do you sell all the stuff? Do you gift all the stuff? Like what's majority, what happens to the majority of your projects?
Well, I have some commissions, not too many, but I usually just knit, and then I put stuff to the Shetland Textile Museum in the hope that somebody will buy it. And sometimes I give it away, or I'll donate it to a charity if they're looking for something for a raffle. Right. But I just need to keep knitting. But you were speaking about the belt. There's actually, in the northern half of Shetland's biggest island, there's no tradition of using a knitting belt. And my father's family was from there, so my grandmother and her daughters, my aunts, didn't use a belt, and they always had the yarn in their left hand. And one of my aunts said that she'd heard that it was a shipwrecked German that had taught people to knit that way.
Yeah, because it's like the Shetland itself is on the crossroads, so there's probably a lot of different influences historically.
Yeah. So
do you have like something that do you usually go for jumpers, or do you go like, what's your like favorite thing to knit? Like if you don't even think about it, what would you like first impulse to knit?
I like big things like jumpers and cardigans.
Right.
Yeah, and then because you get them started and they last a few weeks, whereas if you have a hat, well, you finished it in a couple of days and then you need to start something new. And the hardest thing is always casting on to start something new.
Is it because of the just technical start of it, or is it because like it's harder for you to find an inspiration of what?
Yeah, it's deciding what you're going to do.
Right.
So sometimes if I can't decide what I'm going to do, I'll just sit down and maybe make a pair of cuffs, and then it turns into gloves, and if they're lucky they get fingers. I don't like doing fingers much, but it's worth the effort for the warmth.
And then another thing I wanted to ask you, so I saw this documentary recently about Shetland. It was from like beginning of the century, like the end of the 19th century, and they were showing women knitting, and they calculated that they were knitting at like almost 4 stitches per second. And I actually, like, because I'm an engineer originally, so I'm like, fascinated with math. So I actually went to look at your record, and you are at 0.68 seconds per stitch. I'm at like 1.3 seconds per stitch, which is like, I was very pleased that I'm at least like half as slow as you are. But do you they were showing all these ladies like knitting at super fast speed, that like it was so fast that you can almost like not see what's going on. When you first got that world record, right, that you are the world's fastest knitter, how did it feel, and did people believe it? Like, how did you even think about applying there? Like, were people supportive of that? Were people like, all right, I can knit faster? Like, how was that whole thing happening the first time?
Well, first of all, I'm not a world record holder. The Guinness record holder is Miriam Tegels, and she lives in the Netherlands. But I've been in a couple of competitions where the title of the world's fastest knitter was what we were aiming for. I just felt that it was right that I should be representing Shetland. I really felt that it was. I was doing it for Shetland, not for anything else, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And were people in Shetland was it like Super Bowl sort of thing? Like, was everybody celebrating that you won?
Yeah, I think they were quite happy, though I've been told several times that I can knit as fast as you can. It's fine. And I'm sure they can. But
another friend of mine who I'm not sure, he's said that his world record is being your biggest fan, and his name is David van de Kamp, and he has like every video you shot, and he watched every interview, and he like loves every pattern. Just if there is anybody else who wants to argue that title, they can take it with him. But he was asking if you were planning to shoot a third video, because he studied in depth the first two and he was very ready for the third one. And I said, well, what would you like to be in that video? And he said, I absolutely don't care. I can watch that lady just put the yarn in the darning needle, and that's gonna be good enough. But do you plan to do any other videos? Like, I know that you've been asked about it.
It has been mentioned, but that's as far as it gets. So, and this last year, well, we wouldn't really have been able to do any filming inside, by somebody else.
Right.
So it has been spoken about, but that's as far as it gets. But I haven't got to get up and go to do anything yet.
Right. Do you are you participating in the Wool Week? I know they're doing a lot of prep for the Wool Week 2021, even though they canceled the in-person festival, but they're doing a lot of online things. Are you participating in that? Like, are you?
Yes, I haven't decided finally what I'm going to do, but I'll do something. Yeah, I have ideas, but it kind of means getting down and filming it.
Right.
And I would need to film it before I put in the proposal in case it all goes pear-shaped. Because one of the things I'm planning, I only have one chance at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes with knitting, it's like cutting a piece of knitting. You can't put it back together and cut it again. So
Right.
it has to be right first time. So I need to be in the right frame of mind to get it, you know, to get done. So anyway, but I'll be doing something for Shetland Wool Week, yeah.
Well, we'll be looking forward to that. And what are you currently working on?
I'm working on another, but this is going to be a crop top, sort of waist length, and it's going to have a yoke. It's going to be the same as this one,
Mm-hmm.
different colour, but I'm making it much shorter, and it's going to have no sleeves.
Okay. So
This
like
one. So, and this is green, which is not really a colour I use much, but sometimes you have to knit what other people like.
right.
Because I don't wear green very much. But I did think I might get this one written, the pattern. So I spent a while on spreadsheets last night.
So when you write the pattern, do you have like regular testers for it, or like how does it work? How do you publish patterns?
I very often knit it twice. And I seem to have acquired an extra stitch as we've been talking. Well, anyway, I might knit it twice, several weeks apart, and the second time I'll be reading the instructions. So no, I tend not to use test knitters, just because I thought that there was somebody else I had to pay. I didn't realise that people would test knit for nothing. But,
right. No, usually it's just for the pattern, for the honor of testing your pattern.
Yeah, because by the time that you've paid a tech editor and you pay fees for, you know, selling fees, there's really not a lot of income from pattern writing. So for a while I thought, I don't know if I'm going to bother writing anymore, but suddenly I thought, oh, I could do this one.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then I wanted to ask you, when you teach, do you ever like learn from your students? Do you ever get inspired by their questions? Do you ever get like some new ideas of new classes to teach, or like do you ever want to learn some new technique just because you see it on them? Like how does it work?
There's usually in a class I find there's not a lot of time to appreciate what others are doing, and finding ideas for classes I find quite hard to come up with ideas of something different and something that can be done in a short space of time. I find that quite hard.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have favorite students? Do you have people that you've met and you like totally became instant friends just from the 3-hour class, or
yeah,
it's all a blur?
There's a few that I remember and I keep in touch with. Yeah, it does happen. But it's hard to remember. I might remember faces, or I actually probably remember them knitting better than their faces.
Oh, that's interesting.
I've been looking at knitting rather than people.
Is besides the knitting, what else? How does your day look like? What else do you love doing? What else are you passionate about?
What else am I passionate about? I spend a lot of time doing nothing.
Sounds just like me.
I do a lot of reading, and I try to keep the garden tidy-ish. I'm trying hard to get it minimum maintenance, and I usually have a walk every day. And if I go out, I always have a plastic bag so that I can pick up rubbish. And tonight I had a walk just before we started here, and I'm a bit furious that the grass cutters have been and chopped the heads off what we call mayflowers. I've forgotten what the right name would like. They're a bit like primroses.
Yeah.
Instead of going round them, so yes, I don't like litter. I'm passionate about cleaning up rubbish.
And do you feel like living in Shetland inspires your knitting? Like, because I know, like, when you talk, when I was studying lace, there's like a lot of motifs that based on the nature of Shetland.
Yeah, I tend not to really look and think patterns and colours. I'm not really consciously inspired by sea and sand and hills and sky. Yeah, no, I just choose a pattern and colours and go off with it.
And have you knitted much with something other than Shetland wool, or is that just a no-no?
Not a lot. I haven't. I have something on the needles just now. I've forgotten what it was. Silk and something, but I don't know when it's ever going to get finished. Because with Shetland wool, I know what I'm going to get. I'm never disappointed.
Right.
I know I've got some alpaca somewhere that I've tried knitting something of it, but nothing much happened. So I think sometimes it can be disappointing how it drapes, and
right.
But I know what I'm getting with Shetland wool, and so I stick to it.
And how many projects do you usually work on at the same time? Do you have like a lot of work in progress, or is it like one at a time?
No, it's usually one at a time, though I do have this one that I keep seeing that I might. And then I found one. I was actually looking for something else, and I found one, and that again is something silk and something, and I've done a whole, I don't know how much lace edging I've done, and then I don't know what's going to happen next. So it's obviously waiting to tell me what it's going to become.
Right.
Yeah.
Tea or coffee? What's your drink of choice?
Coffee. Well, no, it depends on the time of day. I always have tea first thing in the morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I usually do the other way around. I have coffee first thing in the morning, and then I'll have tea at night.
Well, yeah. If I was going visiting, I would probably go for coffee, because I'm afraid so many people dip a tea bag in a mug, and I always like my tea in a teapot. So I don't like a tea bag in a mug. So it's safer to ask for coffee.
That's true. Alice, when I talked to Alison Randall, she mentioned that there was such a thing as like going for tea and bring your sock, kind of tradition that everybody, when you go to visit somebody, you bring your knitting with you. Do you carry your knitting everywhere you go?
No. I hardly ever take it out. I take it, I go to be a demonstrator at the Textile Museum, so I take it there, and I would take it if I go to the Shetland Guild of Spinners, Knitters, Weavers and Dyers, a meeting, but we haven't had any of those for a while. But no, I don't take it everywhere, no. Because sometimes I think, oh, well, if I sit down and take my knitting out, then there's a danger that people think I'm showing off, and I can't have that. So I tend not to. I tend to knit at home.
Do people ever like ask you to teach outside of the classes? Like, just can you teach me this and can you teach me that?
Can you teach?
Like anything, like some design element or something that you know, not during class, like neighbors or random people. Do they approach you and start asking you questions?
Well, no, not really. No, that doesn't really happen. No.
Do you do people always ask you about the perfect tension? How to keep the perfect tension?
Well, my tension is not perfect, but it does. And one of the secrets of getting good tension is to pull every stitch tight to the needle as you knit it. But that takes time. It kind of slows you down.
Right.
Anyway, I thought, well, I'm going to try this. I was making a garter stitch cardigan. It has a bit of lace on the edge, and then there's a whole swathe just garter stitch. So I did the lace, and then I got fed up with this, you know, hauling every stitch tight, and it was taking longer. So I just abandoned that and just knit it as I'm doing now, just rattling along.
And did you see a big difference?
I had to rip it back.
Oh, really?
The difference was immense. So now when I see garter stitch stuff, then I do sort of look and wonder. So, yeah.
Right. When you did that competition, when you were trying the competition for the fastest knitting, do you have any specific technique that you like doing that you're not doing like right now? Is there something you're doing different for the competition?
No, I think that finding the most efficient way to hold the needles and the yarn is the most important thing. No superfluous movements, you know. And I think it's really important to have the yarn at the front side of your finger. Mm-hmm. So I always have it where it's nearest the needle.
Right.
I noticed a couple of people at the textile museum on Saturday. One lady she was telling me is she approaching 88 or 89, and she's knit it all her life, but she knits with the yarn behind her finger. Mm-hmm. And for me, that just
slows you down.
Yeah, because it's further from the needle.
Right.
Oh no, I can't do it. I can't do it. So anyway.
Do you, when you teach and like people come, let's say they need continental, do you find it more difficult to teach different knitting styles? So you already like adapted to all kinds of knitting?
I tend not to teach the styles. Most of what I do is Fair Isle. And before you come to a Fair Isle class, you should be able to knit already. And preferably have had a little bit of practice in knitting with two colours. If I've got two colours, I always have the pattern colour, the second one, in my left hand.
Okay, so you have one in each hand.
Yeah, so I can knit with both hands, but yeah. I just find it, my default is always to knit with the right hand.
Right. Well, thank you so very much for sharing all this information with us. And I loved seeing you and I love talking to you. It feels amazing to. Thank you. And I'm gonna post this video on my site and I'm gonna tag you in it. So like hopefully everybody can see, whoever couldn't join us live can see it later.
Yeah. I hope that you learned something.
I did, definitely. I'm sure everybody else who watched it learned something. Thank you so very much.
It's been nice to talk to you.
Pleasure.